Welcome back. Still with me in the studio, Sean Emery, the CEO of Rainfin, a company that's just 3 weeks old in this peer-to-peer lending game. I don't know which Shakespearean title it was from. I think it was from Hamlet, where Hamlet's father said, "Neither a lender nor a borrower be," which I thought was pretty wise of him. But you're saying you're going to stick yourself right in the middle of those two, being the intermediary between the lender and the borrower. This surely, though, Sean, is going to raise, or could possibly raise an issue with the banks, because you're potentially cutting them out of deals.
Well, I think there's two issues here. With raise an issue with the banks, if you're referring to a legal issue and a regulatory issue in South Africa, we ensure that we comply with all of the regulations of the Banks Act.
No, I'm just talking from a business point of view.
So we comply with all of those things. But yes, on a business side of things, we do place some interesting pressure on the banks. But let's be realistic in this marketplace. I think our role is to ensure that we can also work very well with banks. Right now, banks are providing a range of services to their high net worth individuals. They're saying to a high net worth individual, come to our website, our premise. You can buy gold coins here, you can buy shares here, you can do a whole range of things with investing in your money. In the future, why don't they say, well, if you want to lend money to your daughter who clearly needs to buy a new car, you can do it through this platform as well, and we'll just make sure we take care of all the back-end processing for you. We'll do all the debit order processing, we'll do all the paperwork so that you're compliant, and we can ensure that this process is harmonious between the two of you. Why not provide that service to you? Why actually say to you, no, we're going to lend money to your daughter at 26% or at 25%, and you can invest with us at this ratio, and there's no reason for that. So we see in the US specifically, banks are starting to actually embrace peer-to-peer lending and social lending as a product that they can offer a certain sector of their client base who wants to make use of these. Also, what banks are doing is banks are also themselves looking for the ability to invest money that they have. And if that's more the investment banks. And if they can invest in things which have at the moment a little bit more security potentially than shares, or potentially than certain markets that are quite volatile, and they can start understanding this sector, then they can feel comfortable to play short-term money for short-term gain inside this marketplace. So we see two sides to it.
Before we get on to the borrowers, what are the, from the history that you've picked up of the peer-to-peer lenders overseas, what sort of default are you looking at? Where have you pegged the default? Have you been able to find a number that you can attach to it?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the default is different based on the groups of lenders. Okay. So we have these three groups of lenders. So the first group of lender is someone who we regard as a highly creditworthy individual. And that person is coming onto the marketplace, is very astute. They come on the marketplace, they say, I'm presently paying prime +2 and I want to pay prime -1 for my unsecured debt. He has a good profile and he puts his marketplace on, and in that scenario, the bad debt ratios are very, very light. Because, those are highly creditworthy individuals. They've got a lot to lose should they default. If they default on our system, they go through the same credit processes as you would if you default on a loan. Okay. When you go down to the lower sectors, in instance, where there's more risk, and we tell you that there's more risk clearly when you're doing this participation, where you are lending out at maybe 18 or 19% in that basis, then you are going to have defaults that occur. But because you're getting a high interest rate return and you're spreading your money across a whole lot of people, your net returns ultimately should be the same across these three groups. That's the concept of why the interest rate is higher in them. So yes, from a marketplace point of view in the US, they have got some stats. And interestingly enough, the default ratios in peer-to-peer lending services have started to trend towards being better than those in the banks. And the people have said, why?
Why would that be?
Because there's a bit of a social connection now between the people that have lent to each other. Okay. I know that if I use the peer-to-peer platform on Rainfin, that I've lent money from you and 20 people like you. When I lend money from an Absa Standard Investor, I've lent money from a faceless institution. And I feel at the moment more inclined, I've had to prioritize that I'd want to pay back the people as opposed to necessarily the institutions. Also, we could have in the platform exchanged some information which has helped you to decide to lend me the money. I could have also joined a group that you feel comfortable with. Now, stokvels, if you think about it, are exactly the same thing.
I was going to raise stokvels because they've been around for ages.
Yeah, so people lending to each other is not new. You did start your program off by saying to me, we shouldn't be doing this. Ultimately, in South Africa, there's 44 billion rand in South Africa is being lent to each other in a stokvel community. So This is investing and lending. So in that community, it's slightly different. People invest, and then because you put in 100 a month, you can take out 1,200 in December if there's 12 of you in a marketplace. This is slightly different. You don't have to start off by putting in. You can start off immediately by lending, where you've got the wealthier that lend to them. In this context, our platform allows you to create groups with each other, so groups of users, so groups of lenders come together and groups of borrowers. Now, because you're part of a group and you want to make sure that the group is seen to be creditworthy, as an individual, you're not going to necessarily default as much as you would have if you were just a faceless individual. So in this context, we hopefully are going to be able to reduce the risk for investors, although it might seem at the outset that it's a little bit more risky because it's the internet.
Just on almost an aside, while you were talking your way through that there, I was just thinking, would it not be an idea to, let's keep the numbers simple, to take, let's say I'm going to invest in Rainfin.
Well, it's not in us.
Well, so not in you.
Yes.
I'm
use us to invest in people.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Would it not be an idea then to take, let's say I'm going to put 300,000 Rand into it, to take 100,000 on Group A, 100 on Group B, and 100 on Group C. So you're almost spreading your risk and your return.
Yes, so we would
equally across those.
We would recommend that people, when they use our services, do exactly what you're saying. They have the three environments. It's the three classifications of people.
Right.
And then even within that classification, there's significant further diversification. So though you're going to say you're going to take 100,000 to Group A, but also then our system is defaulted like this, that you never lend more than 5% of the money you have to one individual, and you never lend more than 10% of the loan of that individual. So you always, a slice of the loan and a slice of your money gets shared across it. That's one way we think that we can then incur diversification. You don't want to be the person who's lent 95% of the money to one particular loan. Yeah. You also don't want to be that to be all of your money. So this is why the platform creates the scale. Before internet existed, as an individual person, the only way you could get security was to use a bank, because a bank in turn took your money into one pool and they lend it out to 1 million people, but they provide you the scale. Now the internet can provide you the same scale. One investment through us and one administration process, quite clearly, can then be lent out to 1,000 people. And then all these factors do help with the reduction in risk.
What are your costs? What are you looking at?
So we charge, it's very simple. Our costs are exactly the same structures that the banks would use. So there's an administration fee that we do to provide the service to the lender, and that's 1% of the revenue that he receives in the platform. And on the borrower, if a borrower comes to us to use the services, we charge them a 2% origination fee. These are about half of the fees that it would cost someone ultimately if they went into the banking sector to raise money or to lend
So
money.
I give you 1,000 Rand and I get 1,012 Rand back. You will take 1% of the 12 Rand that I've...
1% of the 1,012.
Okay.
So it's 1%. So if you get a 10% return, you must always realize that we have 1% of that. So actually your net return will be 9%.
9%. Okay, right. Now let's get to the borrowers, because I'm sure there are a lot of people sitting, watching, going, okay, well, enough talking about the lenders. I want to know how to borrow here.
How to borrow money, yes.
How do we engage with you?
So a borrower can come to our service, and there's a very simple, I want to borrow or I want to lend. There's two different buttons. So if he wants to borrow, he clicks on the borrow button, and he fills out an application form, pretty same as what he would fill out an application form to borrow from any other financial institution.
Okay.
That is not because we are lending him the money, but we have to gather all the information from him to protect the lender. So we do gather the normal FICA documents, we gather the normal process of income and expenditure, we do a salary slip process from them. But then they get moderated from us and they then put into the marketplace. Now once they're in the marketplace, some very important things that they have to consider. They have to be quite realistic about the amount of money they want to borrow and the amount of interest they're prepared to pay, because they as the borrowers actually set this up. This is actually quite a unique aspect with our platform. We didn't feel it was fair for lenders to come on and say, well, we'll only lend at 20%. We felt much more efficient to let the borrowers be in control of their own credit. So they say, and they know, I can only afford to pay 25% or 10% or 8%, and that's if I get that rate, then I'm going to be better off than lending somewhere else. So they put that out there, that's what they would like to, and then lenders bid against that rate. So they can never pay more than they say they would pay on a marketplace. They come in and they say, I want to borrow 10,000 and I want to potentially pay 18% per annum. Now that's quite high, so perhaps they could say 15 or 10, But obviously the lower they're going, the less investors are going to be out there that will meet them. So they've got to be a little bit realistic about your credit profile, what you earn and how much you're looking for, and of course the story you write about why you want it. The more engaging the story, the more interesting about your circumstances, the more inclined we are to do the service.
Okay, but this sounds like, I'm talking from a lender's point of view now, this sounds like a lot of work for me.
You don't have to do anything. You mean from you borrowing or lending?
Lending.
And when you lend the money, it's very different. You come onto the platform, you say I want to lend 100,000, and you say I want to lend to these buckets, and you choose the buckets without.
Okay, and that's it. Yeah. You guys then.
You can choose to, if you want, to go and see each individual loan. The option is yours to go and have a look and say, well, I'm keeping a bit of 10,000 back for special cases that I like, and you can go in the marketplace and you can even have a look at each individual loan, but you don't have to. You can just lend against the classification.
Right. How do either lenders or borrowers engage with you guys now?
Let's go to rainfin.com and they just register and use the service. It's that simple.
www.rainfin.com.
Yeah.
And then I take it.
There's lend and borrow icons. They click on those and it takes them through the workflow of how they have to go.
There are a load of people though who do not like using technology when it comes to money.
Yes.
Is there any way that people can engage with a face to get more information here?
In order to keep our costs as low as they are and to have all the benefits to each of those parties, the borrowers and lenders, we had to make our environment an online environment only. So we don't have a call center base and they can't walk into a retail bank. If they did, we'd have to charge the same rates as the retail banks did. And we just wouldn't be able to afford it.
It comes down to cost once again.
Really, and we're trying to move those costs on to other people. What's interesting, I haven't mentioned to you yet, but we're launching 2 other products, hopefully by then. We're piloting them already. We hope to launch them by the end of the year. And this might be a little bit more interesting for you. There's one which is mortgages. So a borrower can now do a mortgage through our environment, so try and raise money to buy a house. And the same is then going to be a small to medium-sized enterprise product, which is the next. So an SME product where could have been an entrepreneur who essentially wants to raise some money for him. Now clearly, this represents 3 different kinds of investors. Because you might say, I'd like to lend this person money at 8%, but I'd quite like it if my loan was secured against a mortgage on his house. In that context, we're trying to bring those in so we can hopefully reduce the cost of finance even further for people who have secured debt in the next phase of our marketplace.
Well, once you've got those pilot projects up and fully running and that's open, then you've got to give us a shout and we've got to get you back on here so we can have a chat about those.
We'd love to. Thank you very much.
It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you.
www.rainfin.com. Go and have a look. I'm certainly going to go and have a look around and see what there is on offer.